Hey, Michael J.
I don't suppose you read a secret layer announcement or anything this week.
I love that somehow they're now just slipping spoilers for the upcoming banned and restricted list in advertisements.
I mean, this was a classic one. So there was a secret layer announcement for, I guess, like kitten themed cards, or when I say fairy themed cards, I mean like cartoon fairies, not just fairy creature type. And there were some cool Kaldheim variants of cards like, Frost Titan and Primeval Titan, and another Titan that was also blue and green.
Yeah, I get that, like, there's an alt art Uro Titan of Nature's Wrath, and so they want to make sure that going into the product, hey, by the way, before you pre-order any of this, just so you know, we're going to ban Uro in every format up to at least Modern, and we're talking about possibly Legacy.
That was nice of them. Because I think, like, the opposite would be terrible, right? Like, people
agree.
And buy this product, and then they can't play the Euros.
And this doesn't mean that Uro getting banned in every format is like the only change that's going to happen either, by the way. It just so happens that this is the one that is most relevant to the product, that they're currently advertising. But it's going to be banned in Brawl, Pioneer, Modern, and then they're talking about Legacy. I personally kind of think it should not be banned in Legacy, but
I agree.
I think it's good that they're at least discussing it.
I don't know that it should be banned in Modern either. I was perusing.
Well, I do.
Yeah? All right.
I do. I think it should send, it should definitely at least like raise some red flags that these decks that are playing Cascade into various Tybalts, they're even still using Uro.
Playing Uro. Well, you need a way to win, right? So, like, the Legacy silly Cascade into Tybalt thing at least plays Uro. I'm sorry, I apologize. At least plays Oko as its blue-green 1 card, because you just need a way to win. Like, getting a fast Tybalt gives you an enormous advantage, but it's not a very fast clock.
Yeah. And I mean, it also, there's some, like, in the case of Uro specifically, there's some, like, sustain opportunities also. But there's one other bonus that would be true for Oko as well if he were legal, but there's one other bonus, which is that Uro, like Teferi Time Raveler, blue cards. You see, there's a new breed of Cascade into Tybalt Madness. The new version that's just all the rage is it's one of the ones that cascades into Valky, God of Lies, instead of Tybalt's Trickery, so that instead of your deck just being all uncastable monstrosities and just trying to be all in, you can play like a real game. You just can't play with cards that cost 1 or 2. There's some really clever technology here. So if you check out like Jujubee 2004's 4.0 list from the most recent Modern prelim on the 10th, on the surface you're like, okay, 4 Violent Outburst, 4 Ardent Plea, 4 Valky God of Lies. That all makes a lot of sense. 4 Simeon Spirit Guide, sure, because when you're playing this version that goes into Valky God of Lies, you can play the Spirit Guide, no problem.
And the Spirit Guide's never going to get flipped because this is not a Jund deck. So there's no forecasting cost Cascade problems.
No. And because this is Modern, you can play whatever colors you want, real trivial. You have, all the fetch lands, but you also, not only do you fetch up Breeding Pool and Hallowed Fountain and all that, you also get to fetch up Indatha Triome and Ketria Triome and Rogrin Triome, So your mana is pretty good. And fetching a Tri-land is super duper 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 easy because you're not playing anything on the first turn anyway. You just crack a fetch land and go get a Triumph.
Or probably the second.
Yeah, unless you draw... Well, you have 3 Gemstone Caverns and 4 Simeon Spirit Guides.
I guess on first turn, if it were me or you, we would be casting an Ardent Plea on the first turn. But, mere mortals maybe have to wait till the third turn.
But this new take is actually so sick for... the reason they need the blue cards is because they're playing 4 Force of Negation and 4 Commandeer. Because this deck is so omnipresent and has just taken over that you can just play 8 0-mana counterspells, right? And when your opponent, it's one thing to Force of Negation. Like, that's obviously fantastic. If your opponent just, like, cascades into Tybalt's Trickery, and then you just force a negation the Tybalt's Trickery, which, remember, you get to exile it instead of putting it into their graveyard. So they can't even get it back with the Mystic Sanctuary. So that's pretty sick, right?
That's nice.
And then Commandeer is so sick because you can actually just steal the whatever, right? Like, I guess you can't steal like an actual creature, but like you can steal a Tybalt's Trickery or a Cascade card or whatever. But so particularly, you can commandeer your opponent's Tybalt Cosmic Deceiver. The part that I like so much about this deck is that not only are you playing 8 0-mana counterspells and 8 Cascade cards into playing a 7-cost Planeswalker for 3 mana, but you also have 4 Teferi Time Raveler and 4 Brazen Borrower and 3 Supreme Verdict for some pretty incredible interaction.
And those cards are all blue.
They're all blue, right? And that's part of how you're able to actually support Commandeer is all these blue cards. But that's like Teferi is on plan, unbelievably powerful, forces through your combo while at the same time being a form of interaction. It lets you get a Hate Bear off the table. And it's a plan all its own. And Supreme Verdict, get Hate Bears off the table. It's like, and remember, like Teferi is also good against things like, say your opponent plays their own Cosmic Deceiver. Bouncing it isn't like the best thing ever because they can still just play it as Valky. But at least you got it off the table.
But good luck, right? Like just playing it as Valky is not gonna mess you up too bad. It's not even big enough to kill your Teferi.
Right. So this deck's unbelievable. This is just so incredible.
Yeah, I like it a lot.
It gets even better when you consider the sideboard. There's some really clever sideboarding going on. So to start with, Mystical Dispute, obviously having a 1-mana counterspell that you're allowed to play, even though you're supposed to only play 3s and up.
Yeah, that's so elegant, right? Like it just never... Like the problem with playing certain Cascade cards is that you might accidentally flip your path to exile, right? But that just doesn't work here, because even though it's only 1, it's not really only 1, or vice versa.
And then Fire Spout and Timely Reinforcements are just some of the best interaction you can do for 3 mana. No surprise there.
I mean, 4 Timely Reinforcements is a murderer. I mean, a good person who's entering the Modern tournament might fancy himself to be able to interact with a deck like this because of cards like Eidolon of the Great Revel. They're going to do like 6 points of damage to themselves in one turn.
Good person, yeah.
Like a hero, not like a Cosmic Deceiver type, not like a God of Lies type. Like a, just like a good person, somebody who is just on the straight and narrow, can count exactly to say 14, right? Like that person would be in trouble against Timely Reinforcements X4.
Bone Crusher Giant, like Mystical Dispute, cheats the system. On turn 2, instead of doing nothing, you can actually kill their Aethersorn Canonist or whatever, and then you still get to just drop a Bone Crusher Giant, which is actually pretty sweet, because the types of decks where you would want to board in Bone Crusher Giant, it's not like they're just like set up to have no problem at all with a 4/3.
I mean, Bone Crusher Giant is so fantastic. Like, it's a lot like Timely Reinforcements. It actually just absolutely dominates beatdown decks. A 4/3 is probably pretty good on the battlefield in like just a fist fight with most of the creatures that you're likely to encounter that are problematic for a deck like this, right? Like, Hate Bears are often like a 2/2, for example, which is bad against the front side of Bone Crusher Giant and bad on the battlefield against Bone Crusher Giant.
Wear Tear, so smart. You have the option for 1-mana enchantment removal or 2-mana artifact removal.
Or both.
Also, you get to do it, though, even though you're not supposed to play 1s and 2s. Because split cards, unlike double face cards, and unlike adventures, split cards count as both costs added together. So Wear Tear is a 3-cost card.
This is super smart.
And then finally, one Field of the Dead. Like Uro, it's just sort of an extra victory condition. It's an extra angle going long. So if you're facing somebody who has a lot of ways to keep you off your A plan and your B plan, like it's just another dimension for helping you play like a controlling game. In particular, against other counterspell decks.
So, how would you even classify this deck? Like, when I look at a deck like this, it's got Permission, it's got Supreme Verdict, it's got Teferi Time Raveler. My head is it's a blue-white control deck. Except it's not, right?
This is just a big spell deck. Now, obviously, we often think of big spell decks as playing like a Time Spiral or Enduring Ideal or Form of Dragon, something like that, Tooth and Nail. However, as we saw from Steve Saden's Flash, it's possible for the big spell to only cost 2, right? And the same is true with Hypergenesis, where you're doing it for 3. You're just cascading into Hypergenesis, and then you're done. But the big spell deck, you just play one big spell and try to win the game with it, and you pay some deck building costs to make that one big spell basically game over. But it's possible for a format to get so busted, so broken in half, that the one deck is occupying every spot in the metagame. We've seen this with Fairies. We saw this with Full-On Ravager. We saw this with Caw-Blade, where it's like Caw-Blade is the aggro deck, and it's the control deck, and it's the tempo deck. And it's even the combo deck in some regards. But here, we're at the space where this cascade into Tibalt and cascade into Trickery, it's so busted that you can actually afford to be every part of the metagame at the same time. This deck is the control deck. It's got Supreme Verdict, 8 0-mana counterspells, Teferi, Bounce. It's also the aggro deck. Like, it's really fast, right? And it's an aggro control deck, and it's playing every angle. It's and I'm sure this deck goes beat down sometimes. You just go turn 2 Valky, turn 3 Brazen Borrower.
I mean, it's also the Rock, right? Like, these creatures are high utility creatures. Valky and Brazen Borrower and Bone Crusher Giant are all really high utility creatures, but it's the Rock because it has like Genesis built in. Like that one copy of Uro Titan of Nature's Wrath, there's probably some games that you're like, all right, here's my gigantic guy, deal with it again, and you just keep making them deal with it the same way that, back in the day we used to, what was some terrible creature we would get with our Genesis? You know what I mean? Like, a 1/1 for 3 that, probably drew a card somehow or killed one of their cards. But same deal, right? Except for this is a 6/6 for 3. That draws like 2 cards and gains 6 life on every cycle. Like you do.
So not all of these Cascade decks are. They're all kind of converging in a certain sort of play every role of the metagame vibe, but like they don't all look exactly the same. Like McWinsauce's list, it's got the Force of Negation, Teferi Time Raveler, Simian Spirit Guide, Brazen Borrower thing going on. It's got the Bone Crusher Giants in the main deck. But then what's interesting is instead of 8 counterspells, it's only got 6. And instead of the Commandeers at all, it has 2 Mystical Disputes so that it can have room for 2 Omnaths. Yeah, what do you think of this direction?
I don't know. When I looked at this deck, I was just like, is this a different archetype? And then I was just like, I don't know. This is probably just an intellectual limitation on my part. I just disliked it. Because it has Omnath, and I feel like Omnath is the bad people.
No, this deck... Now, I realize that this deck is only 3 cards different. I guess it's technically... it's 5 cards different. But, this is a ramp deck. You see, the other deck has Supreme Verdict and Commandeer. It's the blue-white control deck. This deck has Omnath and an extra Uro. It's the ramp deck. You use Omnath to ramp into Tibalt Cosmic Deceiver.
You just cast it?
Yeah!
Oh my gosh. Now, even though Omnath is the bad people, now I like it because they're the innovator.
And then, dude, Leyline of the Void, some nice graveyard hate.
Yeah,
right?
this thing's... The sideboard is ridiculous when you have no color limitations. Right? It's like...
I don't know that anybody has color limitations in Modern anymore.
Yeah, it's just like, well, fetching. Leyline is free anyway for most people.
And then PT Arts to win. Their list is interesting. So they've got 2 Commandeers, 3 Mystical Disputes, and 4 Enforced Negations. So they actually have 9 counterspells, right? But then they only have 1 Supreme Verdict. So they have 2 less Supreme Verdicts in order to make room for 2 copies of Failure Comply. Failure Comply is a split card that counts as costing 3, even though the 2 sides are Failure, 1 a blue, return target spell to owner's hand. And then the Aftermath ability is white sorcery, choose a card name, and until your next turn, your opponent can't play it. So you can Failure as another counterspell, making this deck have 11 counterspells. But you can also Failure your own spell.
If they're getting your spell, you could Failure it to put it back in your hand so that you can recast it next turn.
Say they Mystical Dispute and you only have 2 up. And you can't just Failure bounce their Mystical Dispute, on your Ardent Plea, because they could just play it again. They got the mana. But you can bounce your Ardent Plea and go again that way. But hopefully what you do is bounce their card. And in particular, one of the things you do is bounce their card and then comply them so that they can't actually play it again on the next turn.
Yeah, you build your own Meddling Mage, right?
Right. And so Failure Comply is actually, it's potentially a very effective way to buy yourself some time and then also force through your interaction. It's like a silence. Because, once you're in a space where all you really have to do is name Force of Negation, if everybody in the format plays 4 copies of Force of Negation, Failure Comply is, pretty good in that metagame.
Yeah, I mean, it's also, this seems like a really great card to hold up if you're playing against the Tybalt's Trickery version.
I don't know if I can get behind 4 Core Firewalker, where they think Core Firewalker is so good they just want to cascade into it. How sick is it to just play 4 Core Firewalkers and also 8 Cascade cards to find Core Firewalker? Maybe that's just busted. Because maybe if you just get into this spot where you're like, yeah, my deck just has 12 Core Firewalkers. Good luck being a red deck.
Yeah, I've never played against someone that demented. Now, don't get me wrong. I've played against Core Firewalkers. I have myself played Core Firewalkers. I've never played 12. I mean,
I love the Core Firewalker is so busted of a combo. It's 7-cost Planeswalker or Core Firewalker. I'm going to go Core Firewalker on this one.
I think, the fact that you can go turn 2 Core Firewalker, turn 3 second Core Firewalker with Ardent Plea, and you can exalt it in the first Core Firewalker. I think that even any Core Firewalker on the same timing as Valky God of Lies is probably a higher win expectation. Right? Because Valky God of Lies isn't a particularly fast way to win.
No.
And so you're not really actually great at stopping them from just, especially if you took 6 damage or something from an Eidolon, or you took early damage from Goblin Guide and Monastery Swift Spear or Soulscar Mage or whatever they've got early. They might just still kill you, even though you've got Valky God of Lies flipped over into the gigantic Planeswalker version. Just leading on double Core Firewalker, they're in a lot of trouble. I'm not.
You even have Fire Spout, man. Fire Spout Core Firewalker is a Mondo combo.
Super dumb. Yeah, and especially the fact that you also have red cards is.
Oh yeah. Little bonus.
Totally see turn 2 Core Firewalker, turn 3
Shimian Spirit Guide. Here we go.
Let's go. I mean, the existence of Core Firewalker is why I switched to become a Bone Crusher Giant person in Modern. So it's not an elegant way to do it, but it'll get the job done.
Ravenous Trap instead of Leyline, sure. 1 Kozilek Butcher of Truth.
Is that
to not run out of cards?
I'm trying to figure out if there was a way that you could orchestrate their Tybalt's Trickery into that. No.
Well, there is. What you do, you're not. It's not deterministic at all. But you do have a shot randomly, because sometimes you might commandeer the Trickery on the Outburst, steal the Outburst, and randomly the one card you happen to flip is the Kozilek. But it's not the plan at all. It's very unlikely. Really, it's just that you don't want to run out of cards. And that's because one of the most powerful decks right now is actually like a good example of it is MZ Blazer's list. 4 Hedron Crab, 4 Ruin Crab, 4 Glimpse the Unthinkable, 4 Maddening Cacophony, 4 Archive Trap, 4 Visions of Beyond, 4 Mesmeric Orb. And so when somebody's playing a deck like this, also Lurrus too, it's a Lurrus deck, and they get to board in a million Force of Negations like everybody else too. But the dimension that one Kozilek gives you, and it's not like Kozilek beats them. They have 4 Surgical Extractions main deck, and they have an Extirpate in their sideboard. But you make them have to have it, you know?
Yeah, for sure. It actually makes me wish that can this build support Uro or no? It doesn't. It has Breeding Pool.
Yeah, you can support Uro. You got Violent Outburst.
Yeah.
Once you have Ardent Plea and Violent Outburst, you can easily support Uro.
Yeah, I'm thinking this deck should have Uro then.
I would like one Uro.
It's especially if you're saying this Crabs deck is one of the dangerous opponents.
That's one of the reasons why it's so good having 1 or 2 Uros in your deck, is you just have this extra dimension. Like, Uro can kill really fast.
Yeah, I think the explanation that I really, really liked that you gave was just like, this is the control deck. It's the ramp deck. You know, it can be the rock. I think that Caw-Blade is a great example of that when you brought it up before. Like, Caw-Blade on its face is somewhere between a blue-white control deck and kind of a fairies deck, right? But
right.
If in the mirror match, it would often lean very far into the blue-white control universe, and there were different versions that, you know, were playing like the Splinter Twin combo, or there are other ones that were becoming Sphinx decks, etc. So, like, there's just so much space to play a different plan in those 75 cards, or just play a different way using the same cards, just altering your own script.
Totally. But I don't know how much longer we're going to see this. Well, there was another...
You anticipate changes beyond Uro, even at this short period.
Yeah. This is so busted in half. I don't know if they're going to change the rules around Cascade, if they're literally just going to ban both Valky and Tybalt's Trickery.
In every format?
No, in Modern. I don't know that it's that big of a problem in any of the other formats. Maybe it is, but I don't know. I think Modern is this convergence of... Because, like, this is, like, a powerful thing in Legacy, but it's not like it's more powerful than anything else.
Yeah, I think like the Whack Hypergenesis deck in Standard is not... I think it's primarily I dislike it and I feel it's unhealthy because such a high proportion of Magic is played in Standard Best of 1 right now. And I mean, that's
a good point.
Obviously not like, you know, the way it quote unquote should be or would be in a different universe or in previous years, but like that's the reality right now. That like a lot of Magic is Standard Best of 1, and that deck is beatable, but it's not fun to play against. There's like very little interaction in Best of 1 matches if you're playing against it.
So in the February 9th Modern League...
Before we jump, I actually wanted to talk about, in relation to Juju being 2004's deck, so that was a deck that came in first in this tournament, but I thought that it would be worth it to talk about the deck that came in second. Which is
definitely, but I didn't want to jump off the before we get off the Cascade into Valky stuff. There's one more really notable build here from the 9th, and then we can jump back to that one. The BCS 8995's 5-0 list from the 9th. It's another one of these Teferi, Ardent Plea, Force of Negation type of decks, but there's some interesting things. First of all, it's got Demonic Dread instead of Violent Outburst, because it doesn't want to have green mana, which, that seems like it's not too hard to have green mana, but it is what it is. Fine, make the choice. But more interesting, there's some exotic things here. There's one Cosima, God of the Voyage, which is kind of, I guess, sitting in for Uro. There's one Selûne Vision and one Seagate Restoration as part of the mana base. So that's kind of interesting. But then we get to the part that I kind of wanted to... Oh, and there's also 4 Simian Spirit Guides. That's kind of an interesting counterspell to have access to, right? But the part that is deceptive about Spell Queller and becomes a little more clear when you consider this other one, Release to the Wind. Release to the Wind is 2 and a blue instant, exile target non-land permanent. For as long as that card remains exiled, its owner may cast it without paying its mana cost. So what you do is you Valky your opponent on turn 2, and then on the next turn you release to the wind your Valky. And then because you get to play it without paying its mana cost, you just play it as Tibalt Cosmic Deceiver.
That's awesome.
So it's a beast within of sorts, right? Where you're dealing with a non-land permanent. I mean, you can't hit land, but you're dealing with something temporarily. And so it can be a form of interaction. But you can also use it to blink your Spell Queller so that you can get another hit out of Spell Queller, right? And now, heaven forbid, you Spell Queller your opponent's counterspell so that when you blink your Spell Queller, you're, putting in some work that way. But you can also spell in it. It's tough to pull it off, but you can actually Spell Queller your own Valky God of Lies, and then if Spell Queller leaves play, you'll actually get to play Tibalt Cosmic Deceiver. So obviously, if you have Release to the Wind, you can do everything you want anyway. But you can Teferi bounce your own Spell Queller.
Which is nice anyway.
You have a Spell Queller in hand, a Teferi on the table, and a Tibalt Cosmic Deceiver that you can play for 0 mana. So this deck just has a lot of really cool ways to also go off at different angles. And then they're taking that Cascade into Core Firewalker thing even further, but they're playing one copy of Lavinia, Azorius Renegade. I don't know about that, but...
It's one less, right? There's only 3 Core Firewalkers. To me, a lot of the attractiveness is just getting 2 of them in play.
Yeah, but you're still playing 10. It's weird, though, because you can't even, Demonic Dread your own Core Firewalker. I don't know if I like that. I think I would still just want to be on the Violent Outburst plan.
I mean, Violent Outburst is better just in the abstract, right? Like, Demonic Dread has a restriction on it.
Right. And you're not that often actually profiting from the remove blockers.
Blockers? Come on, man.
So I do think there's a lot to be considered regarding this Spell Queller and generally just blinking your Valky other ways. That's an entirely other angle to consider abusing it from that doesn't even use Cascade.
The Release of the Wind option is really cool.
Yeah, it's a really, really clever innovation.
Yeah, it's weird there's only one. In the abstract, this is a really expensive way to do it, right? This is an O-ring that theoretically gives somebody a lot of option out of it, but I guess if you're just going to use it to cheat.
Yep. Gives you some extra outs, but I think blinking your own stuff is super dope. Particularly just Spell Queller, really. But actually, getting back over to that other prelim, you wanted to talk about presumably the Archon of Emeria deck.
Absolutely, yeah. So I thought that was a really good contrast to all of these Cascade decks, right? So I feel like these are just the opposite ends of the metagame, and Double B _33 looks like they came in around second, and this deck seems to me. If you're not going to play the Ardent Plea type deck, this is the direction that you would go, right? This deck,
I don't know.
Well, okay, I mean...
You like this kind of thing. You always... I mean, I think it's fine. It's a way to go.
I'm not a Death and Taxes kind of guy. I just saw all these Cascade decks, and I was just like, well, why doesn't somebody,
just go get them with Dahlias and Leonin Arbiters and... Well, you're not even playing the Canonist in this one,
Well,
right?
I mean, Archon of Emeria is kind of a big fat Canonist.
That's true.
I mean,
It also doesn't die. It's actually super smart too, because unlike the Canonist, it doesn't die to Wear, Tear, and Bone Crusher Giant,
which are played as at least 2 ofs in the main deck, and like probably 6 or even 8 copies after sideboarding.
I also love Sword of Fire and Ice to protect you from Brazen Borrower. I mean, obviously, Brazen Borrower can still do some things, but like, it's the right sword, I think, right now.
So, I mean, this deck is actually a pretty decent power level deck, right? It's still a Stoneforge Mystic deck, right? It's got 4 copies of
And it's got Aether Vial.
Yeah, like, it's weird that, like, when you look at this in contrast to the Ardent Plea decks, like, this is such a substantial step down in terms of, like, pure punching power, but it's actually got a lot of power. And great returns on cards like Aether Vial. I mean, Thalia is insane if you have Thalia fast, right, before they get where they want to get. And if people are doing a lot of fetch landing and so forth, like, you've got Leon and Arbiter. It's weird, like, a lot of these cards that are theoretically pretty good in the abstract are just nothing in context, though.
I do think if you're not going to do something unfair, this is the way to do it. Because I think the control decks, like the Jeskai control deck, is just a worse Ardent Plea Commandeer Force of Negation deck. And I think that the mostly mono red Boros Burn deck, it's just too bad when everybody's got so many core Firewalkers and just so much red hate anyway.
4 timely this is not the
4 timely, right?
Not the time to be playing this. It's too tough if, like, I've beaten in my life, I think I've beaten like 3 timely in a game before. That's very stressful to do, right? I've beaten 2 core Firewalkers, stuff like that. But you can't do that every round, right? Like, that's just not realistic.
But all the decks in Modern right now, besides mono red and mono white, are totally obnoxious, right? Like, you got the deck that runs you out of cards in the first 5 turns. And you got Tybalt's Trickery, and you got Cascade into the Cosmic Deceiver. And then you've also got, remember, you still can just play that 0 land deck.
Yeah.
Just deterministically on the 3rd turn, 3rd or 4th turn, just mills your whole deck. Sometimes 2nd turn. Because if you just draw Simian Spirit Guide, you're there with Pentad Prism.
I mean, I think it's problematic insofar that the Ardent Plea decks are largely playing Ravenous Trap and or Ley Lines, and then the mono white and the red beatdown decks have access to Rest in Peace. Like, yeah. I think it's the same as playing the mono red deck in that you can beat those cards. It's just tough to beat those cards every round. The one thing I'd say about the red white deck is I would have liked it a lot more like a week or 2 ago, before the rise in all these specifically Ardent Plea decks relative to some of the other Cascade decks, because when they were more commonly doing a Tybalt's Trickery to get like an Emrakul, I think the red-white decks were actually pretty well set up against that. They're obviously doing a little bit of damage to begin with, and then a lot of them were just playing like 3 Deflecting Palms in their main deck, right? So before you get Annihilator, you're just like set them up, and it's not like they have a counterspell. They're just, all right, you take 15, like, and they're like, all right, guess I'm dead. But since the universe has moved towards the Cosmic Deceiver instead of towards Tybalt's Trickery, I think the red-white deck's way worse. If it swings back the other direction, which I don't see why it would, right? You get so many more options.
I don't think so. I also just think that when the format's this busted in half, it's not like it's going to swing back to a spot where an all-in Belcher deck is like left unchecked, right? Like everybody's just playing, there's just so many Force of Negations in this format.
Oh yeah, for sure. It's gonna be different, right? They have to do something about these decks in Modern. But what do you think the implications of Uro are in Modern? Just in the abstract, are they substantial outside of these?
Well, I think the single biggest reason that Uro is so substantial is that once they ban out Tybalt's Trickery and Valky, or whatever they do, in that space, whether they hit the Cascade cards or they hit the Tibalt cards. Once they banned those out, Uro was like one of the most dominant things going on, and is just particularly brutal at, like, look at the fair decks, right? Mono Red doesn't want to face Uro.
Nope.
And Uro is so much stronger in Modern than he was in some of the other formats because he's got fetch lands. Fetch lands with Uro is so big. It's just so big. I personally think that Teferi Time Raveler is potentially a problem, but I think that step one is go after either the Cascade cards or the Tibalt cards and Uro. And then on notice, the Crab deck, I think, is like, it's, if you want to beat the Crab deck, you can. So I don't think it's going to be a problem. The Zero Land deck, I think, is like big time on notice, but at least it folds to like Leyline of the Void and Ravenous Trap pretty good, right?
And they have so little way to interact with it, right? It's not like the Ardent Plea decks. Ardent Plea decks have a ton of interplay.
Yeah, the fact that the Ardent Plea deck gets to play with 28 cards that are all like high-powered forms of interaction, and it's just totally messed up. But I think that once you ban out that stuff, I think that the ban of Uro will be felt. I don't think that banning Uro is like necessarily the thing they had to do, but I think that they're going to ban it in enough formats that they'd rather just rip the Band-Aid off anyway, because the truth is they'd probably have to ban it in the next year and a half. And this way, it's also just played out. It's so boring. And Uro's already a staple in Legacy, so it's not like it doesn't have a home.
I think it's nice for it to be in a format like Legacy.
Yeah, I do. I hope they don't ban it in Legacy, but I would understand if they did, because it's definitely powerful enough for Vintage. But the problem is, obviously, nobody plays Vintage. I don't know, man. I think that the implications of Uro are that there's a little bit more room for control and aggro in the post-Cascade into Tybalt's world.
What do you think about banning Uro in specifically Historic, which is one of the most played formats now as well?
Yeah, so banning Uro in Historic is an interesting one, right? Like, that's actually the spot where it's a little bit less clear in certain ways, right? Like, because a lot of the stuff going on, first of all, Historic has had, part of the reason why it's so heavily played right now is that it's actually a pretty diverse metagame, but the most popular deck basically for the last 6 months has been the Sultai or Sultai Splash White for Yasharn. And that deck has proven itself consistently just the best deck in the format. And so it's like, and you know, how much Growth Spiral, Explore type action, how much permission versus black removal versus Thoughtseize, how much of all that stuff varies from time to time. But at the end of the day, Uro is the engine that pulls the whole thing together, and the format will be a lot better for having the best, like, because that deck is consistently twice the second place, right? Like Goblins and Sacrifice and Gruul, those are always like half as popular as the Sultai or Sultai Splash White Uro decks.
I feel like the reason for that is those other decks are just kind of pretending. They're like dressing up as the things that the Sultai deck can just do. Like, what were you really trying to accomplish with some of these other options, right? That deck is just like high-powered in terms of card advantage, high-powered in terms of life gain, high-powered in terms of like sweeping ways to lock up the board or stop your opponent from being able to interact. What do some of these other strategies do? They're like, all right, I made some creatures, or I attacked you. It's just I think will be really good for Historic because it undoes like that so specific tiering.
Mm-hmm.
And the other thing I like about it is I think that there are a lot of like Soulscar mages and Bomat couriers that are currently not getting a lot of action in Historic and suddenly will start getting a lot of action. That's super exciting to me. Imagine, but Bomat Courier, that's like a big game card. Theoretically.
Yeah, it could be.
Well, it hasn't been.
So Uro in Pioneer is actually kind of interesting because it has been a scourge, but it's actually a little bit on a dip right now. It's still a big-time staple, one of the pillars of the format. But, like, it's not even clear that it's like... I mean, it's clear that it's like a staple, but it's not clear that it's a problem, right? One thing that's suspicious, though, is that the Niv Mizzet Reborn decks, they are so omnipresent, and it's not clear that... I kind of think that they're actually underrated. The addition of the Raven's Warning is actually just so huge for them. And they can already play Omnath, Teferi Time Raveler, Bring to Light. Like, they have so much action on top of the Uro, right? But the Raven's Warning is just so powerful anyway. And the ability to set up either getting a Niv Mizzet Reborn out of your sideboard, or getting Koma, the Cosmos Serpent, and then potentially also just getting a sweeper, or my personal favorite, Rakdos' Return.
Yeah, so the Raven's Warning is a saga. It's a new card, right? And it's 1 white and a blue, and it makes like a flying Ophidian in Chapter 1 that gains 2 life. Actually, that's not a fair way to say it. Yeah, it makes a 1/1 blue bird and you gain 2 life. It's Chapter 2 that lets you look at the opponent's hand and draw a card. And then Chapter 3 is a tutor effect.
Right, which, the Raven's Warning being able to go get at some of these super duper high impact cards, most notably Niv Mizzet Reborn, but you've got other stuff too. The looking at their hand, by the way, is not to be overlooked. It's kind of nice when you have Slaughter Games, Yeah. And you have Bring to Light to go get Slaughter Games.
Or you can Raven's Warning Slaughter Games.
You could. Yeah. So, I don't know, man. I don't think it's as big of a deal, because, like, some of the, like, Bant decks and 4-color Omnath decks haven't been as big of a problem lately. But I also just think that Pioneer is going through a lot of turbulent changes right now anyway. And it'll be kind of nice if we can skip the part where, Uro is the problem for a while.
Yeah, I don't know what my opinion is. It doesn't seem to me like Uro is a problem in Pioneer the same way that it is in some other formats, or certainly that it was in Standard. But also, I don't know what the relative popularity of Pioneer is versus some of the other formats. Like, I mean, Pioneer was an important format a year ago. But probably if it's busted in Modern and Standard, we should probably take care of it in Pioneer and Historic. Probably just makes sense.
I just think it's a matter of time too. But part of it is also it's just boring. Like, they got to stop making... I mean, I guess they already have, thank God. But these cards that are just like, hey, it draws a card, and it gains life, and it makes mana, and it's a overcosted thing. Like, it's so weird that to just make Omnath right after Uro. But,
It's funny. I thought that Kaldheim was just going to be, like, more of a return to normalcy. I totally did not see the double Tybalt's trickery sort of thing coming. And it's utterly pervasive. So
but I mean, we knew that Tybalt's trickery was going to be the whole big, that was going to be a big thing in Cascade. And obviously Valky has proven to be the more resilient one anyway, but we also picked that as the best black card in the set. So it's not like...
But I thought people would play other decks, right?
Oh, I didn't. I thought that the Cascade stuff was so clearly just the most busted thing going on that it seemed weird to play another deck, but I don't know. Not much longer, that's for sure.
Well, so what is
Are you expecting any other changes, by the way, in Pioneer or Historic?
The big change that I would anticipate are some kind of rules change around around the Tibalt cards. Like, whether it's something about, like, you know, banning Cascade cards in Modern, that's a possibility, right? I've seen.
Yeah, but I just mean in Pioneer and Historic.
Pioneer and Historic, no. Standard, yes, actually. I think.
Oh, yeah?
I think they got it. At some point, you just have to admit that Yorion is too good.
I would definitely be. I think that Yorion should be banned from Standard.
So personally. I don't know that it's going to get banned, but if I feel like if you're going to ban these other cards anyway, or whatever, you just get rid of it.
Yeah, I think that if Yorion's not banned now, it should be soon, and it probably should have already been. So yeah, put me down for Yorion banned in Standard, Uro banned in every format except not banned in Legacy
or Vintage,
or nothing banned in Vintage, and then I think that the Valky Tybalt's Trickery thing, honestly, it's hard because you're like, oh, Valky is like actually a card that could be played fair. Can it? Aren't there just like 20 different cards? I don't know. No. What I mean is that I don't think in Modern you could possibly ban enough cards to make Valky actually be a fair card.
I mean, is the option then to ban Valky?
Yeah, I think you have to ban Valky and Trickery.
I don't know. Maybe ban Valky now.
Everybody's talking about the Cascade cards. You know what's going to happen? They're going to ban the Cascade cards, and the 3 of the 6 best decks are going to be Valky decks. Watch. I'm telling you, if they don't ban Valky, remind me remind me 1 month from then how great it was that Valky didn't get banned. We changed the rules around Cascade so that we didn't have to ban Valky. Yeah. So you're gonna change the rules around all the other cards to let you cheat.
I can leave you with this.
Okay, here's what you need to do. Here's what you could do. You could change the rules around double face cards and split cards.
Oh, you just have to cast them straight?
If it's not changed, forget Cascade. There's a dozen other problems with the card. But if you actually change the rules around double face cards, that I could believe it. That could actually do it. And then Valky would be an awesome fair card.
I like that idea. I like it a lot. I'll just leave you with this. A year plus ago, Modern was my favorite format to play, and I've enjoyed not playing it over the course of this last stretch. I've enjoyed very much just looking at what was going on around it, because it is interesting to look at as kind of an object in space, and also to discuss the deck design implications without having to slog through some of those battles.
Dude, I'm liking Standard. I'm going to like it even more when Yorion's banned.
Oh, I like Standard. I like Standard. I like the fact that, like, Goldspan Dragon, which is like a fair 5 casting cost card, is just one of the best creatures you could play.
Oh, yeah. I mean, it's a great card anyway, but it's awesome that they've cultivated a world where it can actually shine, you know?
Yeah, that's just like
when
a good thing to do.
When Stormbreath Dragons and Baneslayer Angels, like when you make 4/4 haste or 4/4 flying haste with upside and Baneslayer Angel, and they're like really, really good, but they're not busted. Those are some great signs of a great format.
Yeah, I agree. That's exactly where I'd put it. Like, and there's just such a span. You could go faster if you wanted in Standard, or you could go dramatically slower and more control oriented if you wanted. And all those things are actually possible and just not yet explored. But
we will explore them next week when we do some brewing.
All right. See you then.
See you then, man.
Bye-bye.
Have a good night.
Life didn't work so great. Tried to play Dredge, it's a jailer hate. Ghostly prison waiting for my untapped phase. Yokora trapped in amber stasis state. Lost a lot of friends, got left behind. Had to find a way not to lose my mind. Trapped in a vault with nothing but time. Parents and my friends were the key to find. Magic gave me purpose and drive. The game, the love, it kept me alive. Visions, a better weather, light inside. To do the mirage, gotta survive.